October. And from October to now, we find that the improvement is not what we would have wanted, although there has been an improvement. So let me put that first. Then, Chairperson, we want to also say that as SCOPA, we will be continuing our rigorous process of oversight of government departments. And we want to thank the SIU, the Office of the Auditor-General, because we are going to be getting regular briefings from them on matters of interest, particularly, Honourable Deputy Speaker, around the COVID-19 procurement. Because this is where, as the Honourable Speaker has been pointing out, we cannot allow money intended to alleviate the misery of our people to be fraudulently or incorrectly used by those who want to exploit our people's misery. So we will be tracking that very closely, and we have a commitment that there will be regular updates from the Office of the Auditor-General, who is also doing this tracking. We want to urge our colleagues in all the portfolio committees to do this as part of their oversight when they meet with provincial departments. Make sure that you have an item on your agenda saying COVID-19 to do this as part of their oversight. When they meet with a provincial department, we want to also make sure that you have an item on your agenda to do what the regulation to do this expenditure and conduct oversight. When they meet with a provincial department, we want to also make sure that you have an item on your agenda to do what the regulation to do this. Those should be avoided if the regulations are being followed. And we must commend the Premier for instituting these investigations, because we think as SCOPA that it sets the correct tone in the province, and making known those findings and assuring us of the action. And we will be waiting to hear about whatever actions are following. So, Honourable Deputy Speaker, let me then thank everyone who has made these contributions. As has been said, SCOPA, we work as a team. In that one, it doesn't matter which political party you come from. Of course, as a deployee of the ANC, I will say that I am carrying out the mandate of my organization, but I'm certain that colleagues in that committee do the same. And we want to then thank everyone for their contributions, and we commit ourselves to ensuring that these resolutions are followed through. Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker.
Thank you so much, Honourable Governor, the Chair of the SCOPA. That concludes the debate on this report and resolutions. We will now subject the report and resolutions for adoption. We will go through party by party, starting with the ATM.
Honourable
ATM.
Speaker,
You are not audible, sir.
Honourable Speaker, siyamukela. Am I audible, Speaker?
Yes, uzwakele baba, siyabonga. Let's proceed to the ACDP. We will note that we have received an apology from the ACDP. Then proceed to MF.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. The Minority Front supports the resolutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
And the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's proceed to the NFP.
Honourable Deputy Speaker, the NFP support the report. Thank you.
Siyabonga mhlonishwa.
Nimkhuzela ubishopi.
Siyabonga mhlonishwa. We proceed. Economic Freedom Fighters.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. The EFF supports the resolutions and the reports. Thank you.
To the Democratic Alliance. Order, honourable members, order. Democratic Alliance.
Thank you, Speaker. The Democratic Alliance adopts the report.
Thank you. Let's proceed to the IFP.
Honourable Deputy Speaker.
Honorable Speaker, the IFP supports the report of the SCOPA and its resolution. I thank you.
Siyabonga Mphephethu. Let's proceed to the African National Congress.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Speaker. The ANC fully supports the SCOPA report and all its recommendations. Thank you very much.
Siyabonga Ncamalala. We will now present an opportunity to individual members who want to vote differently from their parties or who want to abstain from the position of their parties.
Ukhozi bengitshelile ukuthi uzokwenza njalo. Uzobuvelaphi lo hlongondlela.
Order, honorable member. In the absence of the official indication, we will take that the report has been unanimously adopted by the House. Thank you, honorable members. We will now proceed to item 7.2 of our order paper, commemoration of the centenary celebrations of the birth of the late Mr. Harry Themba Gwala, who was born on the 30th of July 1920, the first chief whip of the opposition in KwaZulu-Natal Legislature, and the leader and the stalwart of the African National Congress. In this debate, we will request the Honorable Premier Kuzeni to lead the debate from the African National Congress. You have 20 minutes, Kuzeni.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, Honorable Deputy Speaker, Honorable Ndobe, the Speaker of the Legislature, members of the Executive Council, honorable members of the Legislature, compatriots, and all the citizens of our province who are following us today. Honorable Speaker, yesterday, the solemn African sun rose to bring us the sad news that the gods of Africa had finally came to take our beloved elder and the fountain of wisdom, our liberation stalwart and East Chalwandwe, Andrew Mlangeni. Although Ubaba Mlangeni was at the twin light of his extraordinary life at 95 years, still his death cuts deep as we realize that the transitioning of the last Rivonia trial closes a chapter in our long journey toward freedom and justice. We convey deep sympathies to his family. We honor him for his integrity, his selfless service to the downtrodden, and for not betraying the struggle of the oppressed. Now, he has reunited with other Rivonia trialists like Nelson Mandela, Governor Mbeki, Walter Sisulu, Elias Mtswaledi, Ahmed Katrada, Dennis Goldberg, Harold Wall. He is now with his comrade and two-time Robben Islander, after whom today's sitting is dedicated to, Isitalandwe Harry Themba Gwala, who in 7 days would have turned 100 years. Remembering Harry Gwala is not only an important part of the struggle of memory against forgetting. Remembering Harry Gwala in this house is also an opportunity, Honorable Speaker, as it is here in this house where after our first election in 1994, Harry Gwala served as an MPL and the chief whip of the main opposition, the African National Congress at that time. In Madiba's words, the chief whip became, and I quote, the guardian of the ANC policies in the caucus, close quote. Fondly known as Umtomdala and the Lion of Midland, he was aligned with the wisdom of the sages, just as he distinguished himself in the revolutionary courage and fearlessness. Remember him for his incisive intellect and single-minded devotion to the liberation struggle. We envy those who heard him speak. We celebrate those who saw him in action, and we bless those who were at the feet of his passionate teacher and a great orator. So, in remembering Harry Gwala, we also remember some of his famous students who include Moses Mabhida, William Kanyile, and Jacob Zuma. Writing on the 20th of July 2020, the day Comrade Harry Gwala passed on, former Premier of KwaZulu-Natal and the current South Africa High Commissioner to India, Sbundebele, said, and I quote, "Comrade Mtomdala was a teacher par excellence. He hated learning by rote. He had so internalized Marxism-Leninism that he could give us lectures for 2 years without any text. And when you finally lay your hands on the book, be it Capital or Maurice Confide, it would like you had long read these. But he also had so much depth and detail about the country we live in, South Africa. We just marvel that you could be a university graduate and yet find so much you have never heard of, both in context and perspective from Harry Gwala," close quote. Honorable members, although it was not said often while this giant of our revolution walked among us, we thank him for his honesty and frankness. He spoke truth to power without flinching, because he understood that without being truthful to one another, we would then delay the revolution or allow it to be sold at the altar of political expediency and political correctness. Honorable Speaker, paying tribute at his funeral, former President Nelson Mandela said, and I quote, "Personally, I was fortunate to cross swords with him on many issues, but both in prison and outside. I would naturally insist that I was right, as Harry would definitely insist that he too was right. But the abiding lesson from all this is that none of us emerge from such debates the poorer in knowledge, in appreciating issues from different angles, and indeed in forging an enriched understanding of the struggle," close quote. Mtomdala was the joy, hope, and inspiration of conscious, radical, and militant South African youth. He molded them to be fearless and he opened their eyes to the promise of socialism. He believed in the struggle for the national democratic revolution and ultimately socialism. He dedicated himself to the struggle against capitalism, the exploitation of the working class and the downtrodden. He fought against the capital relations of production, which produce and reproduce underdevelopment, inequality, poverty, and unemployment. As a revolutionary cadre and a committed communist, he had absolute faith in the power of the poor masses to be their own liberators against the national oppression, which in South African case saw both the class and race intertwine to exploit blacks in general and Africans in particular. Thanks to this distinguished son of KwaZulu-Natal, who together with his comrades became a key architect of our freedom and democracy. Today, we also pay heartless tribute to the fallen spear of the nation for his great contribution to the ending of violence and forging of peace in our province and our country. In his honor and the multitude who died in KwaZulu-Natal during the so-called black-on-black violence, we must remain united and deepen peace, tolerance, and development. Compatriots, honorable members, we thank Comrade Harry Gwala for his great contribution in building of the South African trade movement and laying the foundation for South Africa's Progressive Labour Relations Act. Today, as our country faces a job bloodbath and a weakened economy, we look to the labour movement to rise to defend the historical gains of the working class and fight for the protection of jobs. It is our revolutionary duty as patriots to oppose attempts to erase stalwarts like Harry Gwala from the annals of our history and the consciousness of the youth and the masses of our country. South Africa is a much better place today than it was before 1994 because of compatriots like Harry Gwala, who genuinely believe in the ideals of a united, non-racial, non-sexist, equal and prosperous society. Our country needs many fearless stalwarts and cadres like him who will speak truth to power even when it makes us uncomfortable. Comrade Harry Gwala was a passionate non-racialist who understood the world through the dialectical materialism and history. Looking at the unique circumstances of South Africa and its characterization of a colonialism of a special type, he believes that the ANC was on the right side of history. He thought that whilst the philosophy of the Black consciousness movement had succeeded in philosophical liberation and restoration of Black pride, it was still incapable to bring about a non-racial, equal, and just dispensation. He was a proud member of the ANC and a devout communist who had no doubt that the ANC was at this phase of the struggle best placed to deliver the National Democratic Society. In the centenary year of his birth, we must strengthen the unity of the oppressed masses of our land. But also, we must unite the working class, which is carrying much of the disproportionate sufferings that have been visited upon with the numerous challenges created by the apartheid and the current challenges of COVID-19. We must ensure that we dismantle all the structures and institutions which continues to perpetuate racial-based inequality and gender-based inequality. The renaming of the Edendale Hospital, where he worked for 4 years and mobilized staff and healthcare workers, is part of the struggle for memory against forget. And the provincial government is in full support of declaration of his gravesite as a national heritage site. It is the duty of our generation to ensure that the South African youth learn about this giant of our revolution. One of the tragedies that we still face as the country and the province is that we do not write enough about our own history and heroes of our revolution. Comrade Harry Gwala addressed many gatherings in KwaZulu-Natal and throughout the country. He did many interviews, wrote critical essays and articles, but all these archives with his fingerprint and voice are not in one source like a book. This great teacher and writer passed on, not having written his own biography, and many people who knew him intimately are passing away because of age. We hope that The Harry Gwala Foundation, which was established last year, will prioritize the writing of a book on the life and struggle of Harry Gwala. This we all owe to his memory and contribution. And there can be no doubt that when we have archived peace and safety for women and children on our streets, homes and places of work, and when we have banished inequality and poverty, that the Lion of Midland will find his internal peace. If he could speak again, he would be honest again about the dangerous divisions in the society, the lack of decisive economic transformation which perpetuate poverty and inequality. Honorable Speaker, his life is a sharp reminder of importance of organizing the masses so that they can liberate themselves from the tyranny of race and gender-based inequality, poverty, and underdevelopment. We pay tribute to him for teaching us that, and I quote, people do not get their freedom merely because they want to die for it, and merely because they are prepared to suffer. They still need to be organized properly and have a proper direction. The important thing is to organize people properly, know how to go forward, and know how to go back if need must be. Know when to advance and give a big push, close quote. And we all know that the era of COVID-19 demands that people are effectively mobilized and organized to protect themselves from the prevalent infections. It is a time that demand we all lend a hand to give history a big push toward a more just and equivalent and equitable world order. It is the time to refuse that the vast wealth of our country is owned and controlled by a tiny minority, while the overwhelming majority languish in a sea of squalor, poverty, and indignity. The poor have suffered too long, and many are feeling they can no longer tolerate a world order that is designed to keep them marginalized and economically excluded. If we fail to lead this big push, we could have a leaderless and a chaotic revolt that will leave everyone a loser. This legislature has an important task to hold all of us accountable about the impact of our programs in changing the lives of the people, especially the poorest of the poor. Comrade Harry Gwala had key attributes, and among those attributes was his concrete understanding and execution of the revolution. He taught us that we must strive for scientific knowledge. Even today, socio-economical and political conditions obtaining in the flesh requires cadres armed with the revolutionary theory. But as asserted by Karl Marx, practice without theory is blind. Theory without practice is sterile. Harry Gwala would not only theorize the revolution, but will tenaciously lead the execution of all revolutionary programs. And therefore, those of us who happen to be here in this legislature, representing the revolutionary movement, have a duty and a responsibility to execute the revolution with no fear. Harry Gwala was an organizer and an educator of the people, to be part of the struggle. And in the contemporary struggles, we must mobilize people to be part of the fight against crime and social ills. People must take a lead in the campaign to fight against gender-based violence in their localities. People must be organized into organs of the people's power, such as school governing bodies, to protect schooling and schools, as well as other community infrastructure. People must lead socio-economic emancipation and eliminate poverty from our own societies. Harry Gwala would appreciate economic growth and radical economic transformation. And in commemorating him, we are called to strategize and ensure that we reignite the country's economy. But Harry Gwala would call on us not to reignite the same economic structure that existed before COVID-19. He would advise us that this is an opportune moment to restructure the institutions, systems, operations, and ownership of the economy. Thus, he would emphasize that radical economic transformation remains the policy position of the ruling party and must be implemented in full. I'm convinced that Harry Gwala will applaud the launch and the implementation of One Home, One Garden program. He would applaud the execution of Operation Vula as part of radical economic transformation, especially RASET, bulk buying, Youth Business Development Fund, Operation Vula Fund, and other initiatives. Harry Gwala was a teacher and organizer. As a former teacher, he would applaud access to education that have been delivered by the ANC-led government. But he would further call on us to expedite the delivery of quality education and encourage that the current program of e-learning should be rolled out to all rural and township schools. He would emphasize health and care of the poor. In today's world, which is engulfed by coronavirus, and we all have to play our role in capping the spread of this virus. But Harry Gwala would further demand we expedite the implementation of the National Health Insurance. Harry Gwala would end us.
Thank you, Honorable Premier. Unfortunately, your time is up for now. You will come back later with your concluding remarks. Thank you for the introductory input and for setting the tone for this debate. We will now proceed to Honorable Mthembu Mvelase from the ANC, and we'll give you 5 minutes, Mvelase.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Speaker. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of the class struggle. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serfs, guildmaster and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and the oppressed, stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight that each time ended either in revolutionary reconstitution of the society at large or in the common ruin of the contending classes. That is, in the Communist Party manifesto by Karl Marx. The above explain vividly how Comrade Themba Gwala understood and pursued life and struggled throughout his life. It is no surprise that some in this house opt to walk out when celebrating the life and times of this uncompromising revolutionary. The reason being he was uncompromising to an oppressor and anything to do with an oppressor. If he was alive and asked about the conduct of those who absent themselves from the house during the debate on his life, he would have responded without hesitation that they did the right thing. The feeling they have about him is exactly how he feels about them. So the feeling is mutual. Themba Harry Gwala, also known as Themba, was born on the 20th July 1920. His parents, Philemon Mjamane Gincika and Bella Krigiza Umakatini, were from Kwasimani in the New Hanover district. Gwala was born into a Natal that have undergone geopolitical transition and resistance in April 1906, which turned into a rebellion with the uprising of Inkosi Uzondi Bambata Kamancinza. As a boy, Gwala emphasized that his grandmother used to get up before dawn together with other women of the area to do what was commonly known as itoho labor at the neighboring white farms and pay about 9 cents a day. Gwala recalled how his grandmother used to return from work at dark into the cold and there was frost, so she used to wear on her feet old rags to protect them from frost. Such condition would later have an indelible impact on his theorization of South African politics, which linked the liberation struggle and trade unionism. Before 1940 and 1941, Gwala was enrolled as a student at Adams College to further higher education and train as a teacher. While at Adams College, Gwala was influenced by Edgar Brooks and Chief Albert Luthuli. Gwala claimed to have been politically conscientized by Dr. Brooks as he had introduced a subject that was not in the syllabus called civics. Through this subject, Gwala began to know something about the society. In 1942, Gwala was employed as a Slangspreid government school in Pietermaritzburg as a teacher dealing with a large number of children from poor families. Gwala witnessed firsthand the appalling socio-economic condition in which African people were living. Gwala was convinced that children's lack of participation in the classroom was a symptom of a broader political system, and this requires that he conscientize both children and their parents. This resulted in the establishment of Intertakusa Youth Club, which became a political forum to conscientize the community of Slangspreid about segregation and its impact on the livelihoods of Africans. It was through this initiative that Moses Mabhida, one of Gwala's students, was recruited to the Communist Party during the mid-1940s. The Communist Party was active in the Natal and it has a local office in Pietermaritzburg. While Gwala was still employed as a teacher, he attended political classes conducted under the auspices of the Pietermaritzburg branch. Gwala's interest in reading communist literature grew substantially and he was recruited as a member of the Communist Party in 1942 by Peter Martindale, who was the branch secretary of the Pietermaritzburg Communist Party. Gwala and Seppi Mazibuko were the only Africans in that branch. It was in the Communist Party school that Gwala learned about the history of the ANC, about why it was important to be involved in the ANC activities, and about the African nationalism. He joined the ANC in 1944, being a member of the Communist Party in 1942. Gwala joined the ANC as it was being revived in Natal and at the same time as the Congress Youth League was being established. Having been influenced by Josiah Jelle's views, Gwala sought to use the Congress Youth League as a vanguard to transform the moribund Natal ANC into an active political player in the liberation struggle.
Thank you, Vanessa. Your time is up. Thank you. We are now proceeding to the IFP and DA, and I must take this opportunity and indicate to the House that we have received a report from the IFP and DA that they will not participate in this debate, but they will rejoin in the next item. So they have requested to respectfully not submit speakers in this item. So we'll then proceed to the EFF. Honorable A.V. Khoza, you have 3 minutes.
Greetings, Segala Somlomo, Premier, and all honorable members. I wish to begin by stating that we are here debating on this august occasion, having reservations. Our concerns are based on the fact that currently there is neither policy nor guidelines giving us parameters within which we ought to operate in order for us to avoid a situation where such an important occasion is boycotted by certain parties in the future, as we can see here today. Let's expedite the process of developing a policy for such commemorations. Having said that, Deputy Speaker, we are honored as the economic freedom fighters to be participating in a debate in honor of a gallant fighter, a revolutionary of the caliber of Ubaba Harry Themba Gwala, who would have turned 100 years old had he been with us. But we know for a fact that his fighting spirit is here with us, as he didn't die, but transitioned to the world beyond. In that regard, I wish to address Umdala direct and say revolutionary salute Mpepet. We were privileged to have had you as our leader during our lifetime. We know that what you went through. We know what the racist Boers and the apartheid regime did to you. Even when they locked you up, you never surrendered. Even when they took away your hands, you still had your voice and your mind, and you kept fighting. We remember that upon your return from prison, instead of succumbing and retiring, you began where you ended before prison. We know that relentlessly the regime pursued you and you fought back. We remember the wars of Natal Midlands and KZN as a whole, where you defended our people against the white racist regime and its black surrogates. Some of them decides not to debate your day. That we will never forget. I wonder what would be your thoughts looking at this provincial legislature where you once sat and led. What would you say about the rampant corruption, the regular expenditure, and the collusion and conniving between officials and politicians of the ruling party who are looting the people's money with impunity? I wonder if this is what you signed up for. Is this what you went to prison for? Is this what you fought for? I don't think so. We ask you, Mpepet, to mobilize our Chief Albert Lutuli, Joseph Nduli, Madiba, Umambo Kela, Florence Mkize, Pastor Pungula Nabanye, and plead with them to intervene. The ANC you left behind has long abdicated its responsibility to govern. They are now full-time looters, moonlighting as public representatives. Now is the time to intervene and remove the ANC.
Your time is up,
Don't leave
Honorable
the spirit of Harry Gwala live.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable VP Taluza from the African National Congress, you have 4 minutes.
Honorable Deputy Speaker, we join the country and the world in mourning the departure of the last Rivonia trialist, a great revolutionary, Istalando Ubaba Andrew Mlangeni. We are saddened but not defeated by his departure as he joined the revolutionary branch in heaven. Honorable Deputy Speaker, as I reflect on the conduct of those who have opted to boycott this commemoration, my conclusion is that indeed, Ubaba Themba Gwala was larger than life. For even in death, they are afraid of him. They want to silence him. They want his memory and ideas to be forgotten. But what they don't know, Honorable Speaker, is that they can refuse to honor him, but in the books of history, his name is written amongst the great men and women whose shoulders we stand on. Today, we commemorate a life of a teacher, a trade unionist, a communist, and by far, one of the greatest revolutionaries produced by the People's Movement. Many people might have forgotten that he was the first chief whip of the official opposition in this legislature in 1994, which is why we applaud the leadership of the 6th administration for ensuring that they keep his memory alive. Honorable Speaker, noma isibongo sakhe kwakungesaka Gwala, but the Lion of Midlands was brave and fearless. His love for children and the youth is displayed by the role he played as a professional teacher and through his teaching at the University of Life in Robben Island. Honorable Harry Gwala, because indeed he was honorable, believed in a united, non-racial South Africa that he was prepared to die for. His love for the youth is displayed in the manner he always wanted to teach, including changing and transforming a football club into a life university. Even though he left the teaching as a profession to join the trade union as an organizer, he never stopped teaching. Honorable Deputy Speaker, for years, Harry Gwala has been described and labeled as a warlord and irrational, but today I want us to correct that narrative because we do not believe that an irrational being would have had the revolutionary passion to impact his knowledge in the way in which he did with many of his comrades. A warlord would not have had the passion for books to an extent of dreaming for a better life of the people of South Africa, including those, Honorable Speaker, who boycotted this commemoration today. A warlord would not have believed in that South Africa belongs to all those who live in it, black and white. Comrade Harry Gwala was intolerant of all inequalities as they breathe poverty and a society that is dominated by another class. Comrade Harry Gwala believed in a classless society that would benefit all races and end all form of domination, be it black and white. His desire to have every child in school shall never be betrayed. As we commemorate his life today, a life he lived within the ANC and the South African Communist Party, I say, we are richer today because of his teaching, that no matter your circumstances in life, you don't abandon the struggle just because it is unbearable, but you defeat all adversities and soldier on and fight. Like Harry Gwala's character of no retreat and no surrender, we shall not retreat nor surrender our fight against greed and corruption, elements that lose and prohibits progress in South Africa. And we commemorate today a life that was well lived. As the ANC, we pride ourselves in commemorating a life of Perpetual's caliber, a leader of an alliance who led it when it was not fashionable. Inkokheli, who fought for workers diligently, and a selfless leader who sacrificed his profession when the struggle for workers called for his service. In celebrating his life, in celebrating the life of our Chief Whip, let us ensure that we fight gender-based violence and build safer environment for all vulnerable groups. We must. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. Again, honorable members, the NFP has respectfully decided not to participate in this current debate, but they will rejoin in the next item. We will then proceed to the MF. Honorable Takure Rashband, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Speaker, Honorable Members. The MF expresses our condolences to the Andrew Mashlingeni family on his demise. Today also, the MF takes pride in speaking on the late Honorable H.T. Gwala. His life was definitely one of hardship, but it was well lived for the struggle for our freedom. Our late leader, Mr. A. Rajvansi, knew him very well and was a colleague of his in the new dispensation. Mr. Rajvansi always told us on many occasions of the late Mr. H.T. Gwala and how feisty he was. And obviously, when I joined the legislature in 1999, I got to know and meet many of the warlords on both sides of the house. But when you get to know them, they were really gentle giants. But I didn't have the honor of meeting the late H.T. Gwala. So today on his centenary, we give appreciation to the Gwala family members for giving us a tenacious leader. May his teachings reverberate through the veins of our youth who need to be inspired by political...
Honorable member.
Thank you. May his soul rest in peace eternally. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable M.E. Pagati from the ATM, you have 1 minute.
Speaker, today we commemorate a brave but disciplined leader, Ubaba Mhlonishwa uGwala. Baba uGwala wangena eRobben Island kwaze kwababili elwela izwe lakithi, elwela ukucindezela kwabantu abamnyama, elelwa ukuthi abantu bakithi basayihlwempu namhlanje. Ifisa ke namhlanje uma simkhumbula sike sibuke ukuthi kulo 25 years ikuphi esikwenzile, ikuphi ekusafanele sikwenze, njengoba sibona nje ukuthi umnotho wakithi usahleli kwabancane noma kwabambalwa abamhlophe. Iningi lakithi alikakwazi ukuthi lingene liwuphathe umnotho. Namhlanje ke siyi-ATM sithi long live the spirit of our leader umuntu omdala ubaba uGwala. Siyabonga.
Siyabonga kakhulu Mhlonishwa Phakathi. The House will note that Honorable Mangele has apologized and therefore we will skip the ACDP and proceed to Honorable N. Dube Ncube from the African National Congress. You have 5 minutes, Nzwakele. Please unmute your mic and camera, Nzwakele.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Speaker. Honorable Speaker, honorable members of the Executive Council, honorable Premier of our province, Kuzeni, and fellow citizens. Indeed, we also dip our spear in mourning the passing of Andrew Mlangeni, our starlet. And this marks the generational history, and it places our future squarely in our hands. And until recently, we have been able to sit and be able to really sit in the wisdom and the wealth of the likes of Babu Mlangeni, like we are doing today, honorable members. It is with profound honor and humility and privilege that we are reflecting on the legacy of the Lion of Midlands, Ubaba Umtomdala. Honorable members, we recall in 1994 general elections where Ubaba Gwala was nominated as a provincial member of the legislature, where he served as a chief whip of the African National Congress, but also former Premier Willis Mchunu was a deputy speaker there. Babu Gwala was a gifted, educated, and outstanding political leader of integrity. To name a few, we remember Abu Babu Josiah Gumede, Inkosi Albert Luthuli, Abu Mama Dr. Margaret Mkambi, Abu Baba Unyembezi, and Babu Gwala. You can name those amongst others. We recall, Honorable Deputy Speaker, Babu Gwala as a principled man who never changed this decision purely on the basis of narrow personal interest. As a matter of principle, Babu Gwala never attended any sitting of the legislature in Ulundi, despite being a chief whip of the ANC. He allowed Comrade Ina Cronje, who was his deputy, to play the role of the ANC chief whip. Babu Gwala, the former president Jacob Zuma, and about Dumsani Makaya, and about Sibundebele were among those members who really made sure that we were able, as the African National Congress, to make our mark and make sure that the people of KwaZulu-Natal know that the African National Congress was the only home for the people of KwaZulu-Natal. Mpepetwa worked with many other experienced and matured leaders in the ruling party. Comrade Mdala worked with the likes of Abobaba Umfene Ndala, Abobaba Uskosane, Abobaba Umakatini. But Babu Gwala taught us that leadership requires courage, the focus to face the hostile environment. He taught us that ours was a principal cause to change the society for the better, and therefore we could not stand in our way to freedom and democracy and even death. When the last president of apartheid South Africa, de Klerk, announced the unbanning of political parties such as the ANC, the SACP and the PAC and other liberation movements, the violence escalated here in Pietermaritzburg. And this prompted Babu Mpepetwa to express his concerns that the third force was behind the escalation of the black on black violence. Babu Gwala taught us that the unbanning of the political parties did not mean the peaceful acceptance of our struggle for the freedom, and that the violence in the 1990s meant that democracy will continue to be challenged by the forces opposed to the cause. He worked tirelessly to assist the people. Babu Gwala, also fondly known as the Lion of Midlands, as my colleagues have already said, served in the Robben Island, and in prison his wife, Umama Elda, died, and Babu Gwala was not even allowed to attend the funeral of his wife. And one of the many descriptions or labels given to him, depending on where you were located in the history of our struggle, Harry Gwala was referred as a man of steel. Yes, he was strong and resolute. While he was serving in the life sentence in the Robben Island, he suffered from the motor neuron disease, which left both his arms hanging on the side. He relied to be helped until his death. How?
Siyabonga Nzwakele.
Okay, thank you.
Siyabonga. Honorable Premier, we now come back to you to render your concluding remarks to the debate. Over to you, Honorable Premier Kuzeni. Your time is 10 minutes. Unmute your mic and camera, Kuzeni.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Thank for the opportunity to conclude this debate. I take this opportunity to thank all members of the legislature who participated in this debate, all of them, including those who come from other parties, such as EFF and the ATM, as well as the minority front. The participation in this debate is also on its own significant because it teaches and tells us who stands where. There are those who stand on the side of the Freedom Charter, who believe in the liberations of the Black people in general and Africans in particular. Those are those who didn't doubt to participate in commemorating the life of Harry Gwala. On the other side, there are those who remain on the right, far right. They are opposed to anything that Comrade Harry Gwala represented. But also they are equally scared of him, even that 25 years after he passed on, they can't speak about the name Harry Gwala. I know, Honorable Speaker, I know as a matter of fact that the ANC-led government will ensure the full attainment of all objectives of the National Democratic Revolution. And indeed, in honor of Comrade Harry Gwala, we recommit ourselves to ensure the full attainment of the ideals enshrined in the Freedom Charter. Compatriots, both Harry Gwala and Andrew Mlangeni were involved in the collection of the Freedom Charter, and that was adopted on the 26th June 1950. They picked up arms and went to prison in defense of the Freedom Charter, which is a blueprint of an equal society that belongs to all people, black and white. The Freedom Charter was a product of all the people of South Africa and was adopted by all racial groups 65 years ago. People were tortured, killed, banished, arrested, and exiled for embracing the Freedom Charter. In the book, The Road to Democracy, Volume 1, the ANC late stalwart Wilton Mkwai recalls about Harry Gwala, and he says, as I quote, amongst the ANC members of Robben Island, Harry Gwala, Umtomdala, was the most uncompromising. He was a very difficult character to deal with. I told Harry Gwala that I'm aware that on his arrival at Robben Island, he told the young generation that umuntu ongathengisi la eRobben Island munye nje kuphela uOmgov. The rest were, as I used to say, we like Jacob Zuma because he used to stand up and try to reason with Harry Gwala and challenge him on some of his assertions about KwaZulu-Natal, close quote. Harry Gwala was sentenced to 8 years on Robben Island in 1964 for sabotage and recruiting for MK. And again in 1975, he was sentenced for second time to life in prison. As I indicated later, the apartheid regime could not even allow him to come and bury his wife in 1984. In the year of the centenary of Comrade Harry Gwala's death, let us rededicate ourselves to the vision of the Freedom Charter and play our part to ensure that all its demands, including sharing of the wealth, of the country's wealth and the land, are met. Let us get to work to ensure that our people have access to clean water, decent sanitization, and economic opportunities. Honorable members, when the Lion of the Midland was buried in 1995, we buried a revolutionary seed which continues to defy death. In anything, the Lion of Midland became a symbol of defiance throughout his life. He passed on with his battle boots on and in the trenches of the struggle. His legendary fearlessness, unwavering militancy, and spirit continues to inspire our generation and the youth of our country. 25 years after his departure from the human eyes, history continues to absolve umuntu omdala. The mother of our nation, Comrade Winnie Nomzamo Madikizela Mandela, was correct to say at his funeral, as I quote, "I have news for those who have come to bury Harry Gwala. His soul marches on in the youth inspired by his militancy, in the women who saw him as a rock, and in the people of our country," close quote. Even in death, we hear his warning that all that we are engaged in a struggle against the enemy with entrenched interest, that political expediency lead to disaster, and that in the end, it will be the strength of the contenders of the struggle that will determine the destiny of the country. The strength of the progressive forces will determine the end of the struggle. As we remember this icon of the oppressed, we also wish to pay tribute to his family for gifting our nation with such an outstanding warrior in the struggle for a South Africa which is truly united, non-racial, non-sexist, and equal. We pay tribute to his beloved wife, whom he was refused to bury. We remember too his cousin, the trade unionist William Kanyile, who was murdered with his comrades by the racist regime during the Matola raid in Mozambique in 1981. We thank his children for never, for even once, demanding anything from the ANC, the SACP, and our government for the sacrifices the family has made for our liberation. May the soul of Comrade Harry Themba Gwala endure forever. Siyazi na namuhla siyawubonga umzabalazo wakhe. Namanje sithi silawulwa uHarry Gwala ibhubesi lase-Midland. I thank you, Honorable Deputy Speaker.
Siyabonga kakhulu Khuzeni. Thank you, Honorable Premier. Thank you to all members for a very dignified debate on the life and times of Harry Gwala, umuntu omdala. We must continue to acknowledge and appreciate that we are where we are because of those that came before us. And across the political spectrum, we must continue to emulate the values and principles that they stood for. As the speakership, we just want to assure the House that we are committed in working with all the relevant structures in formulating a policy that will govern paying tribute and commemorating those that have made a contribution not only in the legislature, but also in the life of our people in general, in the society, in KwaZulu-Natal and in South Africa. And not only politicians, but across the social spectrum. Some may be in sport, some may be in the academia, some may be in business, and some may be in the civil society. And we must continue to acknowledge those prominent members of our society as well as of our legislature that have made a contribution so that there is harmony in how we do our own programs and things in the legislature. Thank you, honorable members. We now proceed to the last item in our order paper, the tabling of the KwaZulu-Natal Special Adjustment Budget 2020-2021, and I will call upon Honorable MEC Ravi Pillay to lead us on this item. You have an hour, Honorable MEC.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, the Honorable Premier, my colleague MECs, Honorable members of the House, heads of departments, chief financial officers, the head of provincial treasury and other officials present, business, academic, religious, and community leaders, respected traditional leadership, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends. I dedicate this budget speech to the memory of the late Honorable Njabulo Ricardo Ntembu, a member of this august House, chairperson of the COCTA Portfolio Committee, and of course a leader and spokesperson of the African National Congress in KwaZulu-Natal. I salute his contribution to the cause of our people. I must also pay tribute to Isitulandwe Andrew Mlangeni, who passed away 2 days ago. Rest assured, Tata, that you stand tall in our minds, a moral beacon for all of us for all time. Hopefully, all of us here will still be here many years later to talk about our experience during COVID-19, whether we became ill ourselves or lost family, friends, comrades. But most of all, I hope we will be able to speak of the contribution we made in the fight against the virus, a fight to save our people medically, socially, and economically. What did we do? What contribution did we make? We have a comprehensive COVID-19 response. On June the 3rd, 2020, I presented the Vote 6 budget and reported as follows. Informed by international best practice and based on advice from top scientists, epidemiologists, and public health specialists, this response encompasses a bouquet of interventions which can be crystallized into 4 pillars, namely 1, the health or medical intervention, 2, the provision of support to our vulnerable, 3, the compliance with the national disaster regulations, and 4, the economic relief and recovery plan. Each of these constitute major comprehensive programs. On the health and medical side, we have the public health education program, we have the treatment program, and ensuring that our hospitals and other facilities are in a state of readiness. We have the screening and testing program, you have the contact tracing program, and you have to put in place infrastructure for quarantine and isolation facilities. With regard to the provision of support to the vulnerable, we have monitored the implementation of the Unemployment Insurance Fund benefits, the Temporary Employment Relief Scheme, the food parcels, the social relief of distress program, and even developed a commendable partnership with civil society in soup kitchens and other relief measures. Our South African Police Service and other security agencies, the emergency services, the compliance officers have all had to work together to ensure compliance with the national disaster regulations. And finally, we have a program developed to bring relief to the business sector and start to develop a recovery plan. Each of these pillars represents a comprehensive program of work. Each contains significant budgetary implications. The 500 billion rand COVID-19 relief program has been allocated nationally as follows. We have the credit guarantee scheme of 200 billion rand, the SMME and informal business support, job creation and protection program with 100 billion rand allocated, measures for income support, which include tax deferrals, the skills levy holiday, and the employment tax incentive of 70 billion rand, support to the vulnerable for 6 months, which includes the top-up of the grants of 50 billion rand, the wage protection through the UIF, again of 40 billion rand, direct grants to the health and other frontline services of 20 billion rand, and support to municipalities of 20 billion rand. I must comment at this point on the credit guarantee scheme, which is not a grant but a loan scheme, follows an agreement between the Reserve Bank, National Treasury, and all the major banks in our country. We have engaged them to get progress reports on the implementation, and I can report that we have expressed our concern at the slow pace of delivery on this particular program. We believe that if it is loans that are backed by a government guarantee, there is an element of public accountability on the beneficiaries and the pace of rollout on this particular program. So we continue to engage with all organs of state mandated to implement the above relief program, and we will ensure that KwaZulu-Natal gets its fair share through each instrument of delivery. The COVID-19 expenditure to date is a matter of much public interest, and we have continued with our commitment to monitor COVID-19 expenditure, having regard to the risks that we had already identified. Preliminary unaudited figures for COVID-19 expenditure per department as at 15 July are as follows and reflects the total sum of orders per department. Provincial Treasury, 898,000 rand. The Office of the Premier, 1,421,000 rand. Agriculture and Rural Development, 19,319,000 rand. Human Settlements, 1,807,000 rand. Community Safety and Liaisons, 768,000 rand. Arts and Culture, 1,210,000 rand. Public Works, 1,970,000 rand. COPTA, 1,431,000 rand. Sport and Recreation, 660,000 rand. Transport, 4,935,000 rand. Education, 485,732,000 rand. EDTIA, 7,193,000 rand. Health, as can be expected, the biggest of them all to date, 1,398,000,000 rand. Social Development, 54,159,000 rand, giving us a total of 1,980,421,000 rand. Honorable members, you will note, if you have a written copy of the speech, that the legislature there is cited as not applicable. It's not applicable in the sense that the legislature does not account to the executive, but in the spirit of cooperative governance and transparency, I can report that the legislature has provided information that they have spent about 770,000 rand on COVID-19 related expenditure thus far. We deem it necessary to set out these amounts in that detail to prove our commitment to complete transparency on the COVID-19 expenditure and to be able to subject these items of expenditure to fullest interrogation. COVID-19 expenditure is guided by instruction notes issued by National Treasury with regard to emergency procurement processes and includes benchmark prices. The first instruction note was issued on the 28th of April 2020 at a time when demand was high and supply weak, hence prices were higher. On the 3rd of July 2020, the schedule of price thresholds was amended and are now more reflective of current market prices. And honorable members, we can take some credit that it was submissions by us from KwaZulu-Natal that resulted in this amended instruction note. We make a strong call that wherever possible, pre-qualification criteria in respect of local production should be stipulated. The Honorable Premier just now in his earlier debate spoke about the need to transform the economy. A leading public commentator just 2 days ago, Muletsi Mbeki, accused us of being more consumption than production oriented. This proves them wrong. We want to stimulate local production. We want to introduce pre-qualifying criteria in our tenders for local production wherever possible. As part of our effort to prevent the abuse of public funds generally and COVID-19 funds in particular, we have, at the direction of our Premier, Honorable Sihle Zikalala, concluded 2 investigations relating to COVID-19 expenditure at the Department of Social Development. These relate to the purchase of blankets and personal protective equipment. Serious irregularities were found, disciplinary action has been recommended, and the matter referred to the South African Police Service. We are pleased that the Premier has made this report content public, and Provincial Treasury will follow the consequence management proceedings diligently, both with regard to internal disciplinary proceedings and in the criminal justice system. The budget cuts which we will present today cannot paralyze us. Yes, there are budget cuts, but that cannot paralyze us. Overall, we are redirecting approximately 5% of the provincial budget towards COVID-19 purposes. 95% remains. Let us focus on the efficient and effective use of that 95%. It is enough work for all of us and can make a significant impact. Perhaps it is in these difficult times that we should ask the following questions. What kind of public representative is required? What kind of public servant is needed? And politically, what kind of cadre is essential to fulfill these tasks? Finally, we need to go further and ask, what is the role of civil society? When will the social compact between government, business, labor, and civil society find real expression and meaning on the ground? Social compacts do not exist in the air. It is at a local level that it must find real expression. So we say to each partner in the social compact, ourselves as government, organized business, organized labor, and civil society, each must claim their space, each must make their contribution. It's only a united effort that will make us succeed. Procurement framework. Limited resources should provide even more impetus to the imperative of our procurement system, achieving the highest levels of efficiency, effectiveness, and a transformative character. All of us and society as a whole need to internalize the provisions of our Constitution. We all profess adherence to the values enshrined therein, but too often we need to pick and choose only those provisions which speak to our class interests. Let us analyze Section 217 of our Constitution. It has 3 subsections, all of which contain critical provisions. 217(1), subsection 1 provides as follows. When an organ of state in the national, provincial, or local sphere of government, or any other institution identified in national legislation, contracts for goods or services, it must do so in accordance with a system which is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. That's subsection 1. Subsection 2 says that subsection 1 does not prevent the organs of state or institutions referred to in that section from implementing a procurement policy providing for A, categories of preference in the allocation of contracts, and B, the protection or advancement of persons or categories of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination. And then section 2173 says, national legislation must prescribe a framework within which the policy referred to in subsection 2 must be implemented. In simple words, subsection 1 provides our basic overarching values and standards. That is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. Subsection 2 recognizes that the above values may be subordinated to the imperatives of transformation. And then subsection 3 effectively says that the instruments of transformation must be set out in legislation. So it cannot just be arbitrary, it must be located in specific legislation that talks to that particular mandate. There's a public procurement bill which will soon enter the legislative process in national parliament. When it does, it will enjoy discussion and debate in the public domain. We will be part of those debates and discussions. It will then be time for us to be upfront and very clear about what we seek to achieve. We cannot be clear about the objective, yet create a tool which is not suitable for the purpose. Until the bill becomes legislated, we must work within the existing legal framework. Accordingly, officials, CFOs and SCM practitioners in particular must understand their roles as the vanguard of progressive public expenditure. The public procurement bill, when it becomes law, will also ensure transparency and public participation insofar as procurement is concerned. But we do not have to wait for the bill to become law. In fact, Provincial Treasury will shortly be issuing an instruction note which provides for the publication of COVID-19 bids on the websites of their departments and also possibly on the website of the Office of the Premier. This is a first step on the road to maximum transparency. Look after the small things and the big things will look after themselves. Now is also the time to deal with those very important matters that do not require big budgets. If the tourism industry is in crisis and needs help to recover, what is it that we can do? If international travel is likely to remain constrained for some time, how do we maximize the benefits of the domestic market? As KwaZulu-Natal, we have the best natural attractions in the form of our beaches, our game parks, the majestic Drakensberg Mountains, and unbeatable weather all year round. Can we focus on making our tourism places and indeed our province clean, safe, and fun? No big budgets are required for that. We simply need to do the work we are employed to do. We need the commitment and the will. Let us re-examine the primary role of local government and its mandate, basic service delivery and economic development. We must together galvanize local government to fulfill this mandate. And I cannot overemphasize the importance of this sphere of government. I want to commend the eThekwini municipality, which has announced very relevant rates, relief, and rebates in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. They're also in the process of completing an economic recovery plan at the city level, which they are likely to fund to the tune of 600 million rand. They are not sitting and waiting. They are taking initiatives which should be an example for all levels or all local government across all the types of municipalities. Water delivery. Our Premier has repeatedly championed the issue of water delivery as a key priority for our province. Significant budgets were allocated to deal with challenges that arose. However, in many instances, it is the operation and maintenance of existing water systems that are problematic. So let us focus on these water systems not only as a basic human rights issue, but also as a key issue for economic development. What serious investor will consider a potential investment opportunity in an area where the water system is unreliable, where there are frequent disruptions and often political instability caused by ourselves? Our economic recovery plan must incorporate these issues as well. They are fundamental to stability, to confidence building. 35 minutes ago, I received a WhatsApp message from Nestle, a huge company which we all know, international company, based in Escort. Their cry is that there is no water in that municipality at the moment, affecting their ability to function as an efficient business. So I want to make a call here for the legislature to consider a special oversight program on water matters, just as we have done with schools, just as we've done with hospitals. We should consider water systems as a key priority which deserves a special oversight program. KwaZulu-Natal is hard at work in the fight against COVID-19. We've been working tirelessly and around the clock since the COVID-19 pandemic was declared a state of national disaster in March this year. The national lockdown, which began at midnight on the 26th of March 2020, has helped to flatten the curve and save lives, gave us the time we needed to put into place the resources we will need at the height of the COVID-19 crisis, and indeed we seem to be at the height if we have regard to the statements by the National Minister of Health, Dr. Zweli Mkhize. And so we observe with great concern the rate of increase of our infections, and we must prepare ourselves to deal with the inevitable surge as announced by the National Minister. We have made great strides to be ready in every way we possibly can, and our response has been monitored throughout by the Provincial Command Council, which is chaired and led by the Honorable Premier, Mr. Sihle Zikalala. As Minister Mboweni said in his Special Adjustments Budget speech on the 24th of June 2020, the storm is not over, but we have taken many steps and we have done a lot to ensure that we are ready to face that storm. The budgetary prioritization I am tabling today is necessitated by the announcement by the Honorable President of the 500 billion COVID-19 relief package. In this regard, national departments are contributing 100 billion towards the relief package, while provinces are contributing 30 billion. KwaZulu-Natal's share of the 30 billion was calculated by applying the equitable share formula, and the province was therefore required to reprioritize 6.21 billion from various departments towards the COVID-19 response. Minister Mboweni announced that projected revenues tax revenues are likely to fall short of target by over 300 billion. The COVID-19 pandemic has also had an impact on our provincial own revenue streams, and we also needed to take this into account in our budget reprioritization exercise. Lower revenue than projected is anticipated, particularly as far as gaming and betting taxes are concerned, as well as tourism revenue that was to be collected through the Ezemvelo KZN Wildlife Public Entity. I will provide more detail on this a bit later. In preparation for the tabling of the adjustments budget today, there have been constant engagements with all the departments who are at the forefront of the COVID-19 response and therefore require additional funds. As the various aspects of our response were determined, Provincial Treasury has been engaging with these departments to understand what this means in monetary terms, and these engagements have happened at least weekly, if not more often. The departments that have been engaged with to determine the budget requirements of the COVID-19 response are in the main the Departments of Health, Social Development, Education, and Transport, but mainly in as far as the social distancing requirements related to learner transport are concerned. Besides the physical response in terms of getting our health facilities ready, caring for the destitute and homeless, as well as getting our schools ready for safe return to learning, it was also important for us to consider an allocation towards economic recovery as a result of the impact that COVID-19 and the national lockdown has had on businesses. President Ramaphosa put it succinctly during his address to the nation when he said, and I quote, we are resolved not merely to return our economy to where it was before the coronavirus, but to forge a new economy in a new global reality. Our economic strategy going forward will require a new social compact among all role players, business, labor, community, and government, to restructure the economy and achieve inclusive growth, unquote. The challenges we face are unprecedented and thus require an extraordinary effort from all of us to ensure that we change the course of the virus without exhausting all the resources we have. We must ensure compliance with the disaster management regulations while also encouraging behavioral change among fellow citizens through educative and persuasive measures. We need to understand what is happening in each cluster of serious outbreak and respond accordingly. The economic impact of the rapidly increasing confirmed cases of coronavirus infection on the global economy is worse than initially expected. The pandemic has also led to a world economic shock of enormous magnitude, leading to a steep recession in many countries, the likes of which were last seen during the 1930 global recession. As a result, the global economy is now expected to contract by between 4.9 and 7.9% this year. Despite the economic relief packages the government has implemented, the country's gross domestic product is projected to suffer an unprecedented negative growth rate of about 8% this year. Of course, notwithstanding the pandemic, the economy of the country had been in a technical recession since the third quarter of 2019 to the first quarter of this year. South Africa's economy, however, is expected to expand by at least 2.6% next year, depending on the duration of the extended national lockdown. The effects of this devastating pandemic are projected to be severe in KwaZulu-Natal too, with a negative GDP growth rate of more than 8.5% in the current year. Driven largely by tourism, transportation, and logistics, the economic growth rate in KwaZulu-Natal is expected to recover at around 3% in 2021. Important work has been done in consultation with the private sector and through the KwaZulu-Natal Economic Council. Agriculture, ICT infrastructure, and manufacturing have great potential to lead and accelerate the revival on the economy. Special adjustments to the 2020-21 budget. The Public Finance Management Act, together with the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Related Matters Act, empowers the Minister of Finance to table an adjustments budget when necessary. National Treasury issued a guideline to provinces in terms of the adjustment budget process to be followed in 2020-21. In this regard, the Honourable Minister of Finance, Mr. Tito Mboweni, tabled the National Special Adjustment Budgets in Parliament on 24th of June 2020. The special adjustments budgets tabled by the Minister of Finance, as well as the one I am tabling today, only deals with the budget adjustments required in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic response. And this includes the reprioritization of 130 billion rand from the existing baseline towards the country's COVID-19 response. Section 31 of the PFMA, read together with Treasury Regulation 6.6.3, determines that provinces must table an adjustments budget within 30 days of the national adjustments budget being tabled, or within such longer period as the National Treasury may approve. I therefore table the special adjustments budgets in the legislature today, which deals with the budgetary prioritization undertaken to fund the COVID-19 response, as well as amendments made to the provincial conditional grant allocation. Section 31 of the PFMA and Treasury Regulation 6.3 to 6.6 determine what may be included in an adjustments budget, with these supported by circulars from National Treasury. In instances where legislature approval is required for an adjustment to a votes budget, this has been highlighted in grey shading in the adjustments estimates book, which Provincial Treasury has prepared and honourable members are encouraged to study. A summary of these are provided today in an explanatory memorandum, while the comprehensive adjustments estimate book will be available next week. National Treasury will then table the medium-term budget policy statement and the national adjustments budget in October 2020, as they usually do. And KwaZulu-Natal will table its usual adjustments budget within 30 days of that, expected to be in November 2020, as is usual practice. This will effectively then be KwaZulu-Natal's second adjustment budget for 2020-21. Now let's look at how we are funding the provincial COVID-19 response. But before I explain how the funds that were prioritized from within the provincial budget were sourced and how they were allocated towards the provincial COVID-19 response, it is important to understand that besides the demands placed on the provincial fiscus because of COVID-19, we are also anticipating a revenue shortfall, and this also needs to be taken into account when we did our calculations. The gaming and betting industry was severely affected by the lockdown, with casinos and so forth only recently allowed to reopen, but under strict social distancing protocols. The impact of this is that the expected revenue from casino and horse racing taxes has had to be revised downward by 368.4 million, and the amounts collected by the KwaZulu-Natal Gaming and Betting Board from license renewals, applications for new licenses, and so forth is revised downward by 11.5 million. Ezemvelo, KZN Wildlife's revenue projections are also severely affected by the impact that the national lockdown has had on tourism activities, and the entity expects to fall short of its revenue targets by 208.4 million rand. I am pleased to announce that the province continues to remain cash positive, as has been the case since May 2010. And it was therefore decided to increase the provision for interest revenue collected by the province upward by 100 million rand in line with the historic collection trends, and this assists to offset the revenue shortfall. The revenue losses in the KZN Gaming and Betting Board and the Ezemvelo KZN Wildlife, as well as the increase in the interest revenue budget under Vote 6, are given effect to in this adjustments budgets, while dealing with the anticipated shortfall in casino and horse racing taxes is deferred to the adjustments budget, which I will table in November, as it is likely that other revenue sources will overcollect, and this will offset the amount the fiscal framework will have to be cut back by. The 2020-21 special adjustments budget sees no additions being made to KwaZulu-Natal's provincial equitable share, while there are amendments to the provincial conditional grant allocation, and I will detail these later. As mentioned, National Treasury indicated that the province should reprioritize 6.2 billion from within its existing resource envelope towards the provincial COVID-19 response. As the provincial COVID-19 response is estimated to cost around 11.5 billion, and I will detail this shortly, the 6.2 billion alone was not sufficient, and departments at the coalface of the response were also expected to effect some internal reprioritization in order to meet the budget demands, while some additional funds were received through the conditional grant allocations. In total, the province sourced 6.3 billion from internal sources, with 6.2 billion going towards the provincial COVID-19 response, and the balance going towards offsetting some of the revenue shortfalls shown by Ezemvelo KZN Wildlife at 190.2 million, and the shortfall anticipated by the KZN Gaming and Betting Board, 11.5 million, offset by the provision for an increase in interest revenue of 100 million rand. In determining how the 6.2 billion could be sourced, various detailed analyses were undertaken, and the detail is provided below. Budget cuts against departments and public entities. As a first instance, all departments and public entities' budgets were assessed line by line to first identify savings that arose as a result of the impact of COVID-19 and the lockdown. Items such as subsistence and also impacted were expenditure items related to hosting events, and these were identified as savings to be used towards the COVID-19 budget requirements. There was also further engagement with each department and entity on areas where further cuts could be effected. For example, against the consultants' budgets, purchases of machinery and equipment, and so forth. The B5 detailed infrastructure budget, as contained in the 2020-21 estimates of capital expenditure of all departments were assessed with a particular focus in all projects which are at pre-feasibility or feasibility stage. I must emphasize that none of the projects that are currently on site or where tenders have been awarded are affected by this reprioritization. It was also accepted that there would be delays in filling posts this year, and departments and entities were thus required to identify and to retain the budget for critical posts, while any savings from posts that could be delayed to be filled next year were used to source the 6.2 billion rand. In aggregate, departments' equitable share budgets were cut by 3.7 billion, with health and education exempted from this exercise. The same analysis was done for public entities, and the transfers to public entities were thus cut by 204 million rand. Funding from the provincial net financial position. The preliminary underspending in the 2019-20 financial year, where the province underspent by 1.9 billion, and the preliminary provincial owned revenue overcollection, where the province overcollected by 410 million, were assessed. Conditional grant underspending was removed from this calculation, while some assessments were made on possible rollovers that will be approved for inclusion in the November adjustments budget. This meant that 2 billion was available to use towards the 6.2 billion COVID-19 budget requirement. Funding from provincial cash resources. Funds earmarked for future allocation, but currently held in the Provincial Revenue Fund were assessed. These funds were previously recalled from departments due to slow or non-spending on specific projects. These have been held in the Provincial Revenue Fund since 2019-20 and relate specifically to the Department of Arts and Culture for the construction of a new provincial archive repository, renovations to the Winston Churchill Theatre, the Osizweni Arts Centre, and the Music Academy in Ladysmith. The amount identified in this regard for allocation towards the 6.2 billion rand requirement is 175.9 million. I do wish to record that these projects will be reallocated funding at the earliest opportunity. Finally, 190 million was taken from the provincial contingency reserve towards the 6.2 billion COVID-19 budget requirement. Costing KwaZulu-Natal's COVID-19 response and allocation of funds. While National Treasury advised that the province should contribute 6.2 billion towards this COVID-19 response, we soon realized that the provincial response was going to demand more resources from us. We've been working very closely with the Departments of Health, Education, Social Development, and Transport. And with regard to transport, it's really largely the learner transport matter. The budget analysts in Treasury responsible for these departments have been in daily contact with these departments and have offered expert advice on other areas that the departments can delve into when looking at their internal reprioritization. The total amount that the province has estimated that is required is, as I said, around 11.5 billion. This is explained in detail below, with health's response calculated at 8.2 billion, education at 2.8 billion, although the education one is likely to be a variable one, having regard to decisions that are likely to be made about school and who goes back when. Social development at 300.1 million, and transport, as I said, in relation to learner transport at 214 million. It was also decided to allocate 300 million rand towards the provincial economic recovery response and to reallocate 200 million to transport towards infrastructure project, and these are detailed shortly. With regard to health, the estimated COVID-19 response in health, as I said, amounts to 8.2 billion, and take into account the provision of personal protective equipment, purchasing ventilators, providing for additional staff, and if I recall correctly, it is hoped to have as many as 1,770 more nurses for a 6-month period, ICU beds, and the provision of additional infrastructure. The infrastructure provided includes converting existing wards into COVID-19 wards, as well as quarantine and isolation sites across the province. This cost also provides for temporary field hospitals in areas such as Durban, Pietermaritzburg, KwaZulu-Natal, and Empangeni. A large portion of the cost, as I said, relates to additional staff, ICU staff, doctors, nurses, and tracing teams at a cost of 3.2 billion, while the infrastructure required for the COVID-19 response amounts to 1.7 billion, with the balance made up of equipment, linen, ICU beds, amongst others. The department has included reprioritization of at least 1.4 billion from their budget and an additional conditional grant allocation of 585.7 million is made, as will be discussed later. The amount allocated to health from the provincial reprioritization sees 4.5 billion of the 6.2 billion allocated to this department. Balance of the costs will be funded through further internal reprioritization. With regard to education, the costs amount to projected costs amount to 2.8 billion, and take into account some of the costs of repairing schools vandalized during lockdown, the provision of chemical toilets at schools that do not have adequate toilet facilities, the provision of water to schools, personal protective equipment, and additional cleaners. The amount identified through internal reprioritization is 1.2 billion, and the amount to be allocated to the department from the 6.2 provincial reprioritization is 1 billion rand. The balance of the costs will be funded through further internal reprioritization in the department. In social development, the costs for providing care for the homeless during lockdown and providing food parcels to destitute families have been calculated at 25.7 million and 239.1 million respectively. The department also indicated that funds of 35.3 million are needed to address gender-based violence. Thus, the Department of Social Development's response is costed at 300.1 million rand. Provincial Treasury engaged the department and were able to identify this full amount from internal reprioritization as a result of the slow filling of posts in the first quarter, as well as lower transfers to early childhood development centers, partially as these were over budgeted for when compared to historic spending, but also because the ECD centers were not open during the lockdown. With regard to transport and learner transport in particular and infrastructure, the Department of Transport calculated the shortfall in transporting the originally budgeted for 58,908 learners, but taking into account social distancing conditions. The calculations take into account that no transport was provided under the initial stages of lockdown when all schools were closed, and also take into account the phased return to school of the various grades. This shortfall was calculated at 214 million rand, and the full shortfall is provided for from the provincial reprioritization of 6.2 billion. As mentioned, besides this additional allocation for learner transport, it was also decided to allocate 200 million to transport for emergency projects to improve the road network and to rehabilitate roads leading to health facilities and re-establishment costs where projects were affected by the national lockdown. The economic recovery response. The Provincial Executive Council has had extensive engagements with the private sector, and we are currently finalizing the economic recovery plan. In this regard, the Provincial Executive decided to allocate 300 million rand towards the provincial economic recovery response. And I must at this stage commend the work of both the Premier and the MEC for Etia, MEC Nomsa Dube Ngube, for the work that has been and continues to be done. The economy has been disaggregated, as I reported on the last occasion, into 11 sectors, being industrial development, the ICT and 4IR sector, infrastructure, tourism, the creative economy, the finance sector, clothing and textiles, health, innovation and manufacturing, agriculture, the informal sector, and even a committee dealing with government red tape and the regulatory framework. Detailed engagements are continuing with the private sector who lead in each of these subsectors. And I think we can confidently say that an economic recovery plan is in the final stages of being crystallized. So this 300 million will certainly not be enough, but it will be a small contribution from the province to supplement the national programs that I've outlined earlier on. Amendments to KwaZulu-Natal's conditional grants. As mentioned, national departments are contributing 100 billion towards the 500 billion COVID-19 relief package, and some national departments identified parts of these funds from the conditional grant allocation to provinces, with the conditional grant budgets of all 9 provinces being cut by all 9 provinces being cut by 6.8 billion in aggregate. So in this regard, KwaZulu-Natal loses a net amount of 958.1 million rand from its conditional grant budget of 22 billion rand. The net amount is made up by receiving additional conditional grant funding towards the health COVID-19 response of 446.8 million, while other departments' conditional grants are cut by 1.4 billion. Where conditional grant budgets are cut, these adjustments will result in delays in some of the planned projects for this year. There was also an additional allocation made towards health in the latter part of the 1920 financial year, with National Treasury issuing an allocation letter in this regard on 25th of March 2020. This allocation was towards the Provincial Health Response, and Government Gazette number 43398 was issued by National Treasury, which allocated 138.9 million to the Department of Health as a provincial disaster relief grant allocation. National Treasury said that these funds should be appropriated in 2021, and this allocation is therefore included in this special adjustments budget being tabled today. A number of the conditional grant frameworks were amended to allow for COVID-19 expenditure to take place against these grants. Thus, instead of funding previously planned activities, these funds will now be used to fund COVID-19 response activities. For example, the Mathematics, Science and Technology grant and the HIV and AIDS Life Skills Education grant frameworks were amended to allow for some of the catch-up activities following the closure of schools during the national lockdown and to provide education on measures to respond to the pandemic to be funded from this grant. Similarly, the Learners with Profound Intellectual Disabilities grant framework now allows for sanitization and personal protective equipment to be procured for these learners from this allocation. Funds may also be reprioritized within the National School Nutrition Program grant for additional sanitization in food preparation and distribution areas and the provision of personal protective equipment. Grants such as the Mass Participation and Sport Development Grant may be used to provide additional support to sports people and support staff while sporting events are suspended. The conditional grant, therefore, for budget for KwaZulu-Natal is amended as follows. Vote 7 Health receives 446.8 million, with this amount allocated towards the HIV, TB, malaria, and community outreach grant. This grant is given a new COVID-19 component, and besides the additional allocation of 446.8 million, there is also a reallocation from the other grant components to this new component of 86.8 million. The COVID-19 component of this grant, therefore, has a total allocation of 533.6 million. These funds are meant to complement provincial COVID-19 spending, and these funds are allocated towards tracer teams, primary healthcare staff costs, as well as personal protective equipment for community health workers. Vote 7 Health also receives a 138.9 million provincial disaster relief. These funds were allocated towards procuring personal protective equipment and ventilators. Vote 3 Agriculture and Rural Development sees a budget cut of 61.7 million against 2 of its grants. The Comprehensive Agriculture Support Grant, CAS grant, is cut by 43.4 million, and the Lima project grant is cut by 18.3 million. Vote 5 Education sees a budget cut of 517.4 million against 3 of its grants. The Education Infrastructure grant is cut by 497.2 million. Of this, 197 million has been directed to the provision of water in schools through the National Department of Basic Education's program that is rolled out through Rand Water. In this regard, water will be provided through this mechanism to 1,125 schools in KwaZulu-Natal. The HIV and AIDS Life Skills Education Grant is cut by 15.1 million, and the Mathematics, Science and Technology Grant is cut by 5.1 million. Vote 8, Human Settlements, sees a budget cut of 427.7 million against two of its grants. That is, the Human Settlements Development Grant sees a budget cut of 358.3 million, and the Title Deeds Restoration Grant sees a budget cut of 69.4 million. Vote 10, Sports and Recreation, sees the Mass Participation and Sport Development Grant cut by 48.9 million, and Transport is cut by 314.5 million against the Provincial Roads Maintenance Grant. Arts and Culture sees the Community Library Services Grant cut by 34.7 million rand. When I tabled the 2020-21 budget in this House on the 6th of March 2020, I tabled a budget with a 390 million rand contingency reserve. As detailed earlier, 190 million of this contingency reserve is being allocated in this special adjustments budget towards the provincial COVID-19 response. This means that 200 million rand remains as a contingency reserve for any unforeseen budget pressures that may arise in year. Budget adjustments requiring legislature approval. Other than these adjustments, the adjustments budget also contains environments and shifts undertaken by departments in reorganizing their budgets in year to respond to COVID-19. Where departments are undertaking environments in this special adjustment budget to provide for their COVID-19 response, and where this environment requires legislature approval, this is highlighted in grey shading in the special adjustments of provincial revenue and expenditure, or the White Book. For example, if a department is moving a budget from one program or main division to another program or main division for purchasing sanitizers and personal protective equipment, and the amount moved exceeds the 8% stipulated in Section 43.2 of the PFMA, and this is highlighted as it requires legislature approval. Section 43 of the PFMA determines that legislature approval is required for any environments of savings which departments wish to undertake, which results in a decrease in funds specifically and exclusively allocated for a particular purpose, any decreases in capital, any decrease in transfers and subsidies to a specific institution, as well as any movements between main divisions which exceed the 8% limit. As I indicated, any such proposed decreases are highlighted in grey shading in the 2021 special adjustments estimates, which I am tabling today. Although it is not for appropriation in our provincial budget, it is important to record that our municipalities are the beneficiaries of the gross sum of 2.179 billion rand directly from national to municipalities. After taking into account various cuts in their conditional grants, KwaZulu-Natal municipalities will benefit from a net additional 1.752 billion rand, and this relief is much welcomed by all the municipalities. In conclusion, Honourable Deputy Speaker, this special adjustments budget is a stark reminder of how public finances have been overstretched by the economic and health crisis resulting from COVID-19. As Minister Mboweni warned us last month, and I quote, "The public finances are dangerously overstretched. If we remain passive, economic growth will stagnate, our debt will spiral inexorably to upwards, and debt service costs will crowd out public spending on education and other policy priorities. We already spend as much on debt service costs as we do on health in this financial year. Eventually, the gains of the democratic era would be lost," unquote. This simply means that while the crisis has required more resources from us, it equally requires wisdom in utilizing these resources. As we respond to the virus and the COVID-19 pandemic, we are called upon to exercise caution, to be responsible and highly disciplined. We must not lose sight of the primary goal of our response, which is to save lives. But we must also start thinking and acting about life beyond the pandemic, on how we will pull ourselves out of the economic quagmire. We must think of how we will make life better for many of our people, so that life becomes more than a mere day-to-day struggle for survival. As stalwart veteran Govan Mbeki said after his release from Robben Island, and I quote, "Life ought to be more than a grim battle for survival. Life must include the joyful pursuit of a fullness towards which all awakened people are compelled to reach," unquote. So as devastating as it has been, this pandemic has reminded us that the actions of one has an impact on the other. So every one of us must act in a manner that seeks to protect those around him or her. In a way, the virus reinforces the spirit of Ubuntu and places on us a far greater responsibility. In respect of us as elected representatives tasked with managing public resources, the responsibility and expectation is even bigger. But the task we have been entrusted with will never be too much to bear. As the Sizulu proverb eloquently puts it, no elephant finds its own tusk too heavy to carry. Akukho ndlovu yasindwa umboko wayo. All of us must execute our tasks diligently and resist any tendency towards any abuse of COVID-19 expenditure, specifically and public funds generally. Anything less will be equal to dishonoring the memory of the late Honorable Ricardo Mthembu and hundreds of other KwaZulu-Natal citizens who have lost their lives in this battle against the pandemic. Let us give practical meaning to the capable ethical state. Let our people see it, let our people feel it. We therefore call on our public service as a whole, across all three spheres, to rise to the occasion. In this job, our jobs in the public sector has been protected, our salaries maintained. It is therefore incumbent on us in the public sector to carry the heaviest burden and lead society through the COVID-19 crisis and beyond. Our health workers are already there on the front line. Our security and emergency services are there too. It is for the rest of us to do our share and hold our own. I would like to thank the Honorable Premier, Sisihla Zikalala, and the Honorable members of the Provincial Executive Council, and in particular the members of the Ministers' Committee on the Budget, MINCOM-BUD, for their support in putting together this special adjustments budget. I can honestly say that the province has never before had to deal with a crisis like this, and the strength and focus shown in finding adequate resources to fund the provincial COVID-19 response makes me proud to be part of this Provincial Executive Council. To the Chairperson of the Finance Portfolio Committee, Mr. S.C. Nkosi, and the members, as well as Stackhoff, we look forward to engaging with you on the special adjustments budget and give our commitment to assist you in your oversight role as far as is possible. I wish to extend my gratitude to the Honourable Minister of Finance and National Treasury officials for their guidance and support in these unprecedented times. I also wish to thank all the officials in Provincial Treasury under the leadership of the Acting Head of Provincial Treasury, Ms. Nelly Shezi, for ensuring that the budget documentation is of high quality, as has been the case in previous occasions. I thank the heads of departments, chief financial officers, and all provincial government officials for the role they played in preparing this special adjustments budget. I also, of course, thank my organization, the African National Congress, and my family for their constant support. It is my honor, Deputy Speaker, to formally table the Special Adjustments Appropriation Bill 2020 for the province of KwaZulu-Natal for consideration in this House, to be read with the Special Adjustments Estimate of Provincial Revenue and Expenditure. I trust that the debate and vote on this bill will be constructive and fruitful. I thank you, Siyabonga.
Thank you, Honorable Committee. That was very comprehensive indeed. Indlovu ayisindwa umboko wayo. Thank you so much, Honorable MEC. You have taken exactly 59 minutes So you have saved us 1 minute from your hour. We will then refer Honorable MEC and Honorable Members this presentation of the Special Adjustment Budget 2020-2021 to the Finance Committee as well as STACOF for further deliberations. Thank you, Honorable MEC. That brings us to the end of our sitting for today. One announcement that I have on my side is that members are reminded of the briefing of the KZN Special Adjustments Estimate Bill 2020 today at 14 o'clock, 2 p.m. The link was sent to all honorable members last night from Mr. Sipamandla Chili. So we request members to also follow that briefing. I would like to take this opportunity, honorable members, and thank all of you, honorable members and colleagues, for your attendance as well as your meaningful contribution to our sitting. I must indicate that this was the first of its kind, a hybrid session, as we have discussed previously, where some of the members are joining from the comfort of their homes, but other members are in the legislature present. The people of KwaZulu-Natal expect nothing but good and exceptional leadership from all of us, more especially during these trying and testing times in the life of humanity. If we play our part well, history will be very kind to all of you, honorable members. I wish you and your families well during this pandemic. I declare the meeting adjourned. The House is adjourned, honorable members. Thank you.
Siyabonga sihlalo wethu.
Thank you, Chairperson.